warfare and what is aggression. And above all, we have wholly different concepts of where the world is and where it is going. 7 weeks ago tonight, I returned from Europe to report on my meeting with Premier Khrushchev and the others. In Berlin, as you recall, he intends to bring to an end, through a stroke of the pen, first, our legal rights to be in West Berlin, and secondly, our ability to make good on our commitments to 2 million people of that city. That we cannot permit. We face a challenge in Berlin, but there is also a challenge in Southeast Asia, where the borders are less guarded, the enemy harder to find, and the dangers of communism less apparent to those who have so little. We face a challenge in our own hemisphere, and indeed wherever else the freedom of human beings is at stake. I hear it said that West Berlin is militarily untenable, and so was Bastogne, and so in fact was Stalingrad. Any dangerous spot is tenable if men, brave men, will make it so. We cannot and will not permit the communists to drive us out of Berlin, either gradually or by force. I am ordering that our draft calls be doubled and tripled in the coming months. I am asking the Congress for authority to order to active duty certain ready reserve units and individual reservists, and to extend tours of duty.
At Vienna, Khrushchev had threatened to cancel American occupation rights in Berlin by signing a separate peace treaty with East Germany by that December. Kennedy tried to negotiate, and 7 weeks later called up the reserves. Khrushchev took that as an ultimatum and gave his threat again. Less than 3 weeks later, the Berlin Wall went up, cementing the division of Berlin.
If there is a crisis, it is because an existing peace in that area is under threat, because an existing island of free people is under pressure, because solemn agreements are being treated with indifference. Established international rights are being threatened with unilateral precipitation. Peaceful circulation has been interrupted by barbed wire and concrete blocks. One recalls the order of the Tsar in Pushkin's Boris Godunov: take steps at this very hour that our frontiers be fenced in by barriers, that not a single soul pass o'er the border, that not a hare be able to run or a crow to fly.
2,000 years ago, the proudest boast was, Civis Romanus sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner. Heute ist der stolzeste Satz, den jemand in der freien Welt sagen kann: Ich bin ein Berliner. I appreciate my interpreter translating my German. Dem Dolmetscher dankbar, dass mein Deutsch noch besser übersetzt hat. There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it's true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress.
Lass sie nach Berlin kommen. Let them come.
After the wall went up, the heat over Berlin went down. Kennedy later said the question of tearing down the wall hadn't even come up from the Defense Department or from state. After all, it was on East German territory. And if the Russians allowed the wall, it meant they did not intend to take West Berlin by force. There would not be nuclear war over Berlin. But the meeting with Khrushchev in Vienna nagged him. He worried aloud that the Russians might see our reluctance to get into nuclear war as a lack of nerve. Someday, he said, he might have to run the supreme risk to convince Khrushchev that conciliation did not mean humiliation. He said that a year before the supreme risk was taken.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, unquote. That, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man.
In the White House, they were talking about what they knew could bring the end of the world. Pink cards were selectively issued to those who would go with the president into a secret bomb shelter if a nuclear attack came. Some wives and families got no pink cards. Finally, they decided to invade Cuba if Russia refused to take out its missiles. We had 180 ships in the Caribbean with 40,000 Marines on them. We collected a 100,000-man army in Florida. Our nuclear missiles on Polaris submarines were aimed at the Soviet Union. B-52 bombers were in the air loaded with nuclear bombs. The day before our invasion of Cuba was promised, Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles, and Soviet ships stopped at our blockade. In the White House, Secretary of State Rusk sat with the president and said, "We're eyeball to eyeball," and I think the other fellow just blinked.
I have this afternoon instructed the Secretary of Defense to lift our naval quarantine. The evidence to date indicates that all known offensive missile sites in Cuba have been dismantled. The missiles and their associated equipment have been loaded on Soviet ships, and our inspection at sea of these departing ships has confirmed that the number of missiles reported by the Soviet Union as having been brought into Cuba, which closely corresponded to our own information, has now been removed. In addition,